Aloha, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Tuna Tiki. Happy Tiki Mug Monday, everyone. Of course, we always have to celebrate Tiki Mug Monday, but today we have two special guests. Today, joining us, we have.
Hi, I'm Fini. I'm from Cabali in Tucson.
And I'm Josh, the director of the film Cabali and the Tiki Mug Obsession.
So I know a lot of people have been anticipating this movie, just like Tiki movies that have started. We're so excited a bit about the film and where the inspiration for the film came from.
So originally, I was talking to a good buddy that was from Tucson out in LA, and he eventually became a co-producer on the film, Mike Clements. And I told him about this project, this idea I had to build the bar in Tucson dedicated to the tiki mug as kind of the central focus. And he said, yeah, maybe you should set up a kind of a time lapse camera and just do something that you could maybe eventually use as a promotional thing. And so I came back to Tucson. We decided we would sort of, come back and sort of kick this around a little bit. And coincidentally, Josh had moved back to Tucson from LA because he was able to work remotely during COVID from his editing gig. And I said, it's just strange. I was just talking to Mike Clemens out there, and Josh had done a short film called Save the Tiki about my moving a giant 20-ton moai in Tucson in 2009 and 10. So I said, hey, what about this? And, you want to have coffee? And that was the spark, but it was really Josh's idea when we finally met. I started telling him about the idea about maybe it could be sort of a do-it-yourself for the building of the bar thing, and I started to mention the mugs, and he said, "Well, hold on."
Yeah, I was like, "What?" Oh, it's true. He did. He was like, I'm building this bar," and he just like casually said, and I've got like almost 1,000 different or I think at that point maybe more tiki mugs in my house, and they're kind of all over the place. And this bar is going to be dedicated to these tiki mugs. And he's going on, and I was like, "Whoa, whoa!" Like, what do you mean you have like a whole bunch of tiki mugs and what are you talking about? And so he's like, no, I've been collecting since like the 90s. And he's rattling off all these people. And it was like kind of Greek to me. I was like, what? And he's like, yeah. So I've been collecting them and they're all scattered about my house. And I said, okay, that could be very interesting. That's an interesting idea. I love do it yourself. I love process films. I mean, I've edited a lot of like behind the scenes stuff for different movies and stuff. So I like that material. But this is kind of interesting. So I said, why don't we go to your place and I'll just shoot you. I'll interview you kind of on the fly, and we'll just see what you're like. And I got to his house, and
There's a problem.
he's like, "Holy!" I was like, "Holy crap!" Like they're everywhere. Like they're everywhere. So I was like, "Okay, cool." And then I got Finney on camera, and he's like an encyclopedia of tiki. And Finney's not like he's not never in the scene. He was
Yeah.
just sort of like he was just a dude in Tucson, and I've known Tiki, over the years because I've worked with Tony Marcico from the Martini Kings, and we've done a bunch of short films and music videos and stuff. So I'm familiar with the scene. But Finney was just like this dude who was like rattling off all these people, all these names from designers to like, he knew the inside and out of like the Book of Tiki, which was fascinating to me. And he was great on camera. And then, 3.5 years later,
Yeah. No, I'm just a
we're here.
fan. I came at all this, as a fan. So Tucson being kind of an outlier, town from the enclave or epicenter of tiki in Southern California, at least closest to here, that was the thing. And so, back then the mugs were a way that I could sort of track and take part in it. And I said, like anything else, if you get into anything for any given length of time, you're going to sort of just pick stuff up. But I never considered myself, what tiki gods like Sven or, and the artists like Shag are the ones that were from the very beginning and what Otto was doing. Like I always thought those guys were, I was just sort of a fan of the scene but the mugs were sort of what really tied me into it.
That's what I found fascinating is that the mug represented so much, particularly for Finney. It was his sort of gateway into that whole world of research and what I would call urban archaeology.
That concept, I thought it was just brilliant. Very, very shortly after I got my first mug in the mid '90s, Sven's book came out in '99, and this thing on hunters and collectors, but in the preface of the whole thing, like right in the introduction, he talks about this concept of urban archaeology and the idea that enough of pop culture had disappeared and was now wrapped to be rediscovered. And, then that and a lot of other things sort of coincided with making that accessible no matter where you were geographically.
Yeah.
So take us back to the beginning when you got your very first tiki mug. What inspired you to take this mug home? Where is it from? And what was your like inspiration? Oh, I have to have.
Yeah, it was very so I remember getting a mug kind of just handed. I think I had a roommate that moved out and left one, and that was the very first one was from Kontiki, but it was long before Kontiki here in Tucson. But it was long before, I had been bitten by the bug, and it wasn't until the mid-90s, maybe 96, 97, and I was in San Diego, staying in Coronado. I have a brother that lived over there, and I just ended up at the Valley High in Shelter Island, and it was still not really even through the full refurbishments and renovations that had gone through, so it was still kind of I wouldn't call it beat up, but it looked like it hadn't really been and seen its heyday for a long time. But the mug was just iconic, and it was it's a lidded mug, and it has a long history in tiki. But at that point, they were being made by Tiki Farm, yeah, who was very very young, barely just past his inception, Holden. So, but the minute Sven's book came out and I started to realize that this wasn't just a really cool object from a cool place in San Diego, that it had a long history and there was a lot of places that had them. And, that was really, like a lot of people, the springboard into realizing how much more was out there that I could learn. And it was sort of a springboard into the history of it.
It's always something that I find so fascinating about tiki collectors. It's like you walk into this tiki bar, or maybe you've collected a mug from someone else, but the first one that you purchased from a bar, there's this like emotional connection to this experience that you had. Where you're just like, I'm having so much fun. I just want to take something home that reminds me of this. But I think also the bigger thing is the process after the first one. Some people have one mug, okay, and then they kind of, like, take it home, and that's their kind of, like, Asian souvenir, but then when you get to collecting and you're just like, "Now I have to have the second one and the third one." So, like, what was the second one, and, like, what happened after the first initial couple of ones when you started really get into collect?
Well, at that point in time, the really the only way that you could collect them, because most of the places had closed down, was through the internet and eventually eBay. But that was just like really the only thing that the best way that you could do it. But yeah,
Mhm.
thrift stores. But it was very rare to find one in the wild, particularly in Tucson. So I think the people in Southern California had a much richer ground to mine over there in the thrift stores. I have 2 mugs, that are in Cabali now, uh, they're Craftsman mugs. They're not marked, but they still have the orange $5 for the pair price tag that I did find at a thrift store, here. Then when Tiki Farm came out and Monk Tiki, it was roughly the same time. They were bringing out mugs, but they were really only coming out with a mug maybe a month or maybe 2 during a good time. So there wasn't a lot of, it was easy to sort of slip into the quicksand because I couldn't envision a time where there'd be 20 or 30 new mugs coming out from all these different artists and manufacturers now. So they're really, it didn't seem to be quite as insidious as a habit as it turned out to be. But I was definitely all in from the very beginning. Or like, oh, this is, yeah, I just had it just touched me on a very, very deep level.
So let's get back to the film. So tiki and film both thrive on escapism. How does Kabali capture that same sense of escape?
Well, I would say the way we approached this picture was we wanted people to feel the same way when they're watching this, the experience that they're watching this, as to when they go into a tiki bar. There's a lot of music in this film. Tony Marsico from the Martini Kings, the composer, used a lot of exotica. I mean, and just some good old rock and roll. So it takes you on a journey. And so I think, visually, we do interviews in places that are just so colorful and bright. Everyone is wearing very bright and vibrant colors. The idea was when you watch it, it's not deep. It's not like, stressful. It's a kickback, enjoyable film where you can just sort of, I don't know, watch this tale, watch this guy take this journey from where he starts as a guy that's just collecting to a guy that, is meeting all the people he's collected over the years. And building this unbelievably amazing bar that he's Quest of is. So yeah, I mean, I like that sort of comparison of describing our picture as an escapist
Escapist vehicle.
experience. Yeah,
Mm.
yeah.
You collected all of these mugs. Then what happened after that? Where did they all end up?
So, I collected them for many years until we opened a place on 4th Avenue in Tucson that was called The Hut. And it was really just a big Quonset hut. My business partner and I, who's still my business partner, Scott Menke, opened that place. And I thought it would be cool to just build a case along one wall and put my mugs in. And I think, by the time we left the hut in 2010, the mug collection was maybe 300 strong or something like that. I didn't know him at the time, but I found out just during the making of this film that John Mulder had come into the hut right towards the end of its reign. And, that was the first place he said he'd ever seen one of his tiki mugs, on display or in public. So that was very cool. And outside of that, Doug Horn was in Phoenix, and he would always come down for a street fair that we used to at 4th Avenue. It's very popular. It's still there, but it's set up right in front of the hut. And so he's kind of ambassador to me. I could talk to him about what was going on or whatever. But when we left there, all the mugs got boxed up. We didn't own the building or the liquor license. And so when we eventually wanted to leave and do our own place, it was clear that I would have to get my collection out of there. So they all just went into boxes and they went into storage at my parents' house in Tucson, in the home where I was raised. Just in this, they were outdoors. I mean, they had a roof over them, but they were open to the boxes were open to the elements and the pack rats and the lizards and everybody else. So it was kind of an excavation when we went back in to get them out to begin the production of this film.
And we have that all on film. We have him going through, dusting things. I mean, there's points where he's just doesn't even know what's in boxes. And for him, it's like Christmas. He's like, oh my God, yeah, I got this one. Oh, yeah. And there are some people, people that are mug addicts, mug collectors are going to see stuff in the movie that are going to be like, my God, he's got that. And it's just sitting like, I know there's going to be people that are going to be like, it's just like sitting there, but it's like
Right.
the cherished
It's
mug.
it's a grail.
Yeah, a grail. Yeah.
So, and you got to remember that when I was collecting, they were mostly vintage mugs. That's what Tiki Quest was, the Bible, the goal. Sven's book kind of lit the fire under everybody. But Duke Carter and his wife had traveled the country and they had amassed this amazing collection, and they published this book of purely vintage mugs. I mean, we didn't have any concept that there was going to be an entire artists movement to create new mugs. At that point, it was really about going about collecting artifacts of the past. So then Jay Strongman, published this book in 2010, and this was about what was going on then. So Duke Carter's book, Tiki Quest, was about what happened in the past. But this book was, just this, this kept it going, right? And so all these guys were just, books in my library or names on the bottom of mugs. And so that's why Cabali was such a great and fantastic journey for me to go on, because I got to, meet these guys and talk to these guys and then eventually befriend them. And we would talk about the old days.
Which is what was fascinating to me, because like when you see this movement grow from like zines, like little underground zines, like Tiki News, into books, and then from books to online with, Central and Ooga Booga, right? And then from there, it's like then to social media, now it's just insane. But it was cool to see that history. I mean, it started almost kind of like just the beginning of the internet, which is what started to drive this scene.
So, what were the biggest creative challenges you faced during your production?
It's the biggest creative challenge for this movie. Okay, so when you're making a documentary, you don't necessarily know how it's going to end, right? Like that's the beauty of docs is, the story comes aligned in the whole edit. So, I mean, if I was to say what's the biggest challenge, it's like chronicling your subject, which in this case was Fini, right? Like he's building this bar, he has a goal, but there's challenges that are involved with that, and you're at the mercy of how that time frame. So it took you, without spoilers here, I think you can look it up online. The bar is built. It took you
Yeah, it was like,
two and a
about 2.5 years. And documentaries, of course, happen in real time. As long as there really wasn't a budget for the bar or the film, which got me in trouble twice. I was building, we were following, to me, Cabali was not a commercial enterprise as much as it was a giant art project. And to work on an art project, you're not using traditional contractors, you're using craftspeople. And craftspeople, who I understand aren't good with numbers because we reside in our right side of our brain, right? Which means we're not good with budgets and we're not good with calendars. And so the whole thing, we ran the risk of spiraling out of control, and it did. And Josh was there, to document that. And it was almost like transcribing 2.5 years on my wheel of pain,
Yeah, got
which gets a little. I noticed when I saw the final or the first rough cuts, how I progressively got worse looking, right? And aging beyond my chronology during this thing. And at the point where I really wasn't sure that I had made any good decisions, in this whole process. And, you wear it, I can see it. And at that point, you forget that the camera's on or whatever. And I think that's where the reality comes in, probably what will resonate with people. Everybody's had a challenge.
yeah.
Can you share a funny or unexpected story from filming that listeners might not know?
When you're interviewing different people, what's really bitching about making docs is that it's like a detective work, like you're constantly going down an avenue, and then somebody will give you something new. Believe me, it's romantic at times, but and tempting at times because the story can sort of get out of control if you go down the a rabbit hole. So we interviewed Sven about the Book of Tiki and Tiki mugs. Then we interviewed Holden, and Holden gave us this really cool tidbit about how the Book of Tiki and Tiki Farm released the same product at the same time at the same place, and that was at Wackoso Place,
yeah,
La Luz de Jesus.
the Hughes Gallery, Billy Shire's gallery,
Yep, and
in LA. But it was the first time that one of Holden's mugs was being released to the public, and it happened to be on the night of the premiere of Sven's Book of Tiki. So it was almost like this, the whole resurgent Tiki movement was lit on the spark of the flint of that night, right? And then we sort of track the huge impact of Sven's book and the importance of Holden's company in kind of releasing this back into the known world.
and Billy Shire.
Yeah, oh yeah, and
I
then
mean,
we also got what now I understand was a very rare opportunity because he's a little bit reclusive and he's not at his places as much. But we were able to then get his take on it as the owner of the gallery and the store that hosted the whole thing and what brought him to that idea. So that was very cool because I'd been in Tiki as long as most of the people at that point, and I had no idea that there had been a moment, like where you could probably say, wow, this is where everything ping ponged into this really crazy direction that we're still seeing, and feeling the ripples of.
The direction is changing for sure, but still moving.
think for me personally, seeing Fini, you got to understand when we started this thing, he didn't know anybody. Like Fini was just a dude in Tucson that was collecting mugs at an accelerated pace, obsessive, like just committed to getting every book in Duke Carter's book, committed getting every mug in Duke Carter's book, and committed to getting every mug in Jay and Holden's book that he just showed you. So what was really awesome that I felt was really awesome was seeing him meeting all these people for the first time because he just knew them by their aura, and he
Right.
would have these in-depth conversations that I'd be like, don't say it. Just wait till we get on camera. We gotta wait till we get Mulder on camera, or whatever. So that was fun to see to see him go on that ride. I like that a lot. I hope that comes through in the movie too, because
You Now that you have so many tiki mugs, what inspires you when you see a new one?
Well, it's a problem, right? But I I've never been the obsessive completist to the point that I had to get something just because it was a tiki mug, right? But I definitely didn't have the safeguards that most people have in now people moderate the collecting by zoning it out to, oh, I'm going to collect Disney mugs, right? Or I'm going to keep it to mugs from bars that I visited. Or I know a guy that collects Palm Springs mugs. Or particular, what's cool is as artists started to get more and more, so people would collect specific artists. So I also didn't have a lot of that. So I still to this point don't the filter I try to like do things that I think are relevant, collect things that are relevant to the scene, but I still have to like them. The problem is I like them all. Like I really just, I have a hard time discriminating by artist. I can never answer who's my favorite artist or what's my favorite mug because it depends on where I am that day. It's like saying, "What's your favorite song?" It just depends on, what your vantage point is at. I was called in the film, an old hippie or whatever, but I do believe it like in abundance. And, that a lot of times there's just more. That as more young artists got into this, and as people started to push the creative bounds, and sometimes the debate started like, is it tiki or not? Because it was drifting more like into the pop cultural realm. But I always like to just come back to the fact that I'm gonna collect what I like, and I tend to like a lot of tiki mugs that are still coming out. So it's never a problem. And if anything, the success that Cabali's had in our first 2 years, it's only enabled me, right? I'm still on the journey.
Yeah, a lot of people recently have been talking about how people are not buying mugs and a lot of people are kind of offloading their collections. What I've been noticing is that we've kind of been going back around to that let's take stuff home from places we visited, which I think is so cool. Like I said, that emotional connection that you have, you're just like, I need to take this home because I had this amazing night. I need to have this on my shelf because it reminds me of a specific day or event or something. And even at tiki events, of course, if you're at the Hukilau, there's a new Hukilau mug. If you're at Tiki Oasis, there's a new Tiki Oasis. You had the best weekend ever. Those emotional connections, at least for me, that's my reason. But then, of course, you do have your favorite artists too, like a Shag or something that has something to do with Whitco, which are like my emotional connections to the Tiki mugs as well. But I definitely see that as a direction. Where do you feel the tiki community is headed for the future?
I think Josh is a very interesting vantage point, a lot of this stuff too, because he came at tiki kind of cold, right? And then got immersed in it and now, knows everything. So when it comes to the mugs and the tiki itself, my opinion now has really been changed by looking at the people that are coming into Kabali, the bar, because when I see a lot of the younger people, it's a speakeasy, so that's sort of an avenue to bring people in who might not be in from tiki, right? Because a lot of people just travel on and go to speakeasies. But what I'm seeing is people in the 20s and 30s are coming out of a childhood that might have had more to do with gaming, or they have a working knowledge of anime. And these are all fantasy based things that actually dovetail pretty closely with Tiki. They might not know Tiki specifically, or they might not know that the giant 9-foot mug behind the bar, or the statue is even a mug, but it's that it doesn't matter that it's the Mark Thomas outrigger. To them, it's dope. Like, it's cool. This is something different. And they're very open to that. I believe that anything that's, not growing is dying. So I don't have a problem with it changing. To me, I would just rather it didn't go away. But to me, I think evolution, no matter if it's born of revolution, is vital to keep something growing.
Yeah.
I think we forget sometimes that there are so many new people that are going to different tiki bars and they're just loving it and they're just like brand new. So if they don't have a collection yet, I think it's okay for some people to kind of like offload some of their mugs to save some space, and that's okay. But I don't think it's necessarily a sign of a decline. A lot of our tiki bars are still very busy. But just because they collect tiki mugs doesn't necessarily mean that they also visit tiki bars. They could just collect them for this art factor, which I love the art factor, the artist, the inspiration behind each mug. Eventually, you can just have a museum and curate, and you could be giving tours.
Big part of what I do at Kabali now is I'm sort of like, you know,
Yeah,
yes,
you can sell tickets in the daytime, for the tour.
yeah, and because a lot of people are coming in and they're like, there's basically two categories. One are some people that either have a working knowledge of tiki or are really into tiki, right? So we get to start that conversation 2 hours in. We already know all the players and the history, right? And they'll have very specific questions about very esoteric pieces in my collection. The other portion of people that come in are like they're seeing a car crash, right? They're like, what? Please, right? I don't get it. Like they can't wrap their head around it. So then that's a different conversation, which I enjoy equally as much, which is trying to, lay it out for them depending on what I feel they're living on without trying to bore anybody, right? But typically they just want to know more. And I think the movement, I'm very bullish on Tiki Begin. I think it's shown over the years, like a lot of things, that if it doesn't completely go away, it might wax and wane. It's definitely always on the cycle. It fluctuates, right? And I think escapism and fantasy are needed more now than ever.
Yeah, and community too.
Okay, so we're gonna talk about the film and the release date and where you can see the movie, because that's the most exciting part. Because now I can't wait. But before we do that, it wouldn't be an episode of Tune and Tiki if we didn't talk about cocktails. So I need to know what your favorite tiki cocktails are and why.
I'm gonna be really boring here, but I love a good Mai Tai, and when we were traveling, that was my jam. I just tried them all around and at the different bars that we'd go to. So, I mean, that's it. I case closed for me. That's my jam.
Well, that's an interesting one to ask me, coming from a long history of bar ownership. We were talking to Beach Bum Berry. Somebody said, what's your favorite tiki bar? And he's like, well, any tiki bar owner who doesn't say his own tiki bar, isn't worth his salt.
That's a
Right.
quote.
So I would be remiss if yeah. So I would be remiss if I didn't say a bar or a cocktail that comes from our bar now, because of course we have some of the classics. But I think right now there's the Tandoori Express, which we serve at Cabali, which has got kind of a curry base, just a great, great drink. It's very complex, and we even have a bartender who's got her own customary way of drinking it, where she sort of takes core samples with the straw and stuff. That's one that's really high on my list. It's very tricky to make in the field, but we still have taken it to a couple of Tiki Oasis and sweet parties. It won an award at one. So it's almost like we transplanting organs. We have to put it all in these coolers and drive it across the desert, right? But yeah, that would be my answer on that one.
Okay. I mean, I don't know that I ever really say what my favorites are, but my favorite is a classic Pearl Diver. Of course, with I love anything with gardenia mix. I love a coffee grog. But if I can't get a pearl diver because there's no gardenia, a jungle bird. All right, so where can we see this movie and when?
Well, drum roll.
Yeah.
I'm gonna let Josh announce this because it's really his baby. It's very, very exciting news, and we're really happy to be announcing it here on Tune Into Tiki first. But here it is.
Tickets will go on sale tomorrow, Tuesday, on the 16th of September. We're in September. For the Newport Beach Film Festival, where we'll be having our world premiere on the 19th of October. That's a Sunday, which is freaking perfect, at 3:15 in the afternoon. You have a plan. Can we say it? Do you think we should say
Well,
it?
we're gonna have a reception afterwards. I love the fact we had to choose on, we're gonna give the world premiere. The Newport Beach said, "What can we get? Can we get the world? Can we get the national premiere, the West Coast, the California, the Southern California?" But we talked about it, and just because of the geography and the concentration of artists that live, within an hour of that area, it's sort of in the triangulation, and I just thought it was perfect that we do it there. So we are going to do a reception. We're making it a tiki. It's national and going to be tiki holiday, right? So we are going to have a reception. Details are not totally confirmed yet as far as the location, but know that immediately following the film, we will be having one. And we've already heard back from a lot of artists that are in the film after their first reaction, which is finally. It was exciting to, see that it was going to be playing at a festival that, thank God, I didn't know how prestigious or exclusive it was, because I found out after the fact and after we had got in, but I was just amazed and very, very pleased and very, very proud of Josh, because he really, really put his heart and soul into this project, and nobody, I think, that worked on it got paid what they would get. It really turned into this big labor of love, and a lot of people that drank the rum Kool-Aid.
And what we have is something really fun. It's special, and tiki is so big, right? Like, there's so many different facets of tiki. There's music, there's clothing, there's mugs, there's just so much. There's obviously cocktails. I liken this to like a tale within that world. I mean, there's so many, sure there's so many cool stories, right? This is one of those. This is one. And it's about the mug and it's about Fini and his just passion to build this beautiful palace dedicated to what he's become obsessed with, and that's tiki mugs, which a lot of people love. And you were talking about, is this going up? Is this going down? Is my experience is like, man, the community that exists and just the tight community, the love that's out there, this not going down. It's just only going up. And you go to those room parties and you're like, just seeing how many people are just engaged with one another and just having a good time and escaping, crazy life we're in.
Right.
Oh, one thing I forgot to mention. So if there's maybe the first showing, just based on how many people I know are going to show up, there is a second showing on Tuesday, also at the Newport Beach Film Festival, in the same theater complex, right? And that showtime is at 4:45 p.m. on Tuesday, and I think that's the 21st.
And look, here's the great thing. If anybody out there is going to modernism,
Week, yeah.
that it's like it's ending there. So if you can't make it to the premiere, which is on Sunday, Tuesday. So what do? You hang out in Palm Springs for extra night. Maybe you go up to the Lucky up in LA. You hit a couple of bars there. You go down to
Mhm.
the Royal Hawaiian. You go there, and then you come and you see our picture. Because believe me,
You're gonna have to post the whole tiki tour or go to both. I mean, you can do both. You can see it twice.
yes,
We'll
Yeah.
be at both. I know there's going to be Q&A, and a lot of people that were in the film are going to be there. I think it's going to be a who's who of mug makers and artists and authors.
yeah, it's a celebration of art and design. That's what this movie is, and a lot of people are interested in coming. So we can't wait.
So for the people that can't make it to these 2 showings, maybe they live on my coast, where would they be able to see it in the future?
We just got people in Florida in April that we will. I think we've said we're into it. We're going to do that.
Yeah,
We're
right,
It sounds like a good time. So that's one coming up
right.
on the East Coast.
And we're still submitting. So after the spring gambit of festivals, I'm imagining that we'll definitely take it on the road. I really like the idea of doing sponsored screenings, particularly in some standout places. Clearly, we're going to do one in Tucson, Phoenix. We're going to do one in conjunction with the Golden Tiki and your buddy Nick in Vegas. Who's been a big friend and fan and Adam. So we're going to definitely do one in San Diego. I would love to do one in Palm Springs. So, that's just a no-brainer. And do something in conjunction with Rory and also the Tonga Hut and the
Yeah.
bootlegger there. So 3 great places. If anybody's going to Palm Springs, you got to hit all 3. But anyway, I think that there will be chances to see it. And then with any luck, the brass ring for any independent filmmaker is to try to get streaming somewhere. So, maybe one day, but that was never the goal. The goal was to try to capture this thing that I think a lot of people would easily not know was going on, and as more and more time goes by. But this was a crazy organic. In no way was it a contrived scene. It was a genuine art movement, and still is.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll tell you, want to hear something really wild? People ask me all the time, my friends outside of Tiki that have nothing to do with Tiki. They're like, "What are you doing? Like, what are you up to? What are you working on next? What are you working on now?" That whole thing. And I said, "Well, I'm just finishing, or where we just finished this documentary that involves Tiki." And they look at me like, "Well, what's that?" And I'm like, "If you've never heard of Tiki?" And they're like, "You mean like Tiki torches?" I'm like, "No, like, have you ever heard of a Tiki bar?" Some of them will say, "Okay," like if you're in Tucson, like the Con Tiki. I'm like, "Exact." And then I show them the trailer or the teaser, and they're like, "I don't know anything about this, but I want to know more." Every person is like, "My God, idea, this is amazing. I wanna go there, I wanna go to Tiki." So
I wanna go here, I wanna go there, I wanna travel everywhere.
yes.
I am so excited for you guys. Congratulations. Everybody listening, don't forget tomorrow, Tiki Tuesday, you can purchase your tickets to see the film. We're so excited. We can't wait.
Well, thank you. It's great to announce here and to be on your show, and great to see young, beautiful people getting into tiki.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity for sharing, yeah.
Thank you guys so much for joining us today and stay tuned.